Teaching activities in occupational therapy comes from Progetti, Chapter 7. So why OTs teach activities? It's to help clients relearn skills that may have been lost due to injury or illness, develop alternative and compensatory strategies to performing valued activities, develop new performing skills to support role performance, and also provide therapeutic challenges that will help improve performance skills in the future. And then also instruct family members or caregivers in activities that will enhance the client's independence in ADLs. So there's 3 phases of learning. There's acquisition. So this occurs during the initial instruction in practice, is often characterized by numerous errors of performance as the client develops strategies to complete the task. Then there's the retention, and is seen through subsequent sessions when the learning demonstrates recall or retention in the task in a similar situation. And then there's generalizing and transferring. This is seen when the client is able to spontaneously perform a task in different environments. So say that you taught them hip precautions within the clinic, and they're able to do it at home. So there's procedural and declarative learning. Procedural is used for tasks that happen automatically without thought. This is done through repetitive practice. And declarative is cognitively recalled. So it's demonstrated by verbally describing or declaring the steps involved in completing the activity. There's principles of teaching and learning. So first you're going to identify an activity that has meaning, and then you're going to find an instructional mode that is compatible with the client's cognition for the task, and then organizing their learning environment, providing reinforcement and grading activities, structure feedback, and develop practice schedules, and help the client develop skill or self-awareness and self-monitoring skills. So first, we're going to identify the meaningful activity. OTs communicate with the client and their family to obtain different ideas that will help the therapeutic process. And then once you have the different activities, you can utilize them as intervention tools. And this is Lee the painter, so Lee will obviously be more motivated and an active partner within the therapy process because he sees painting as being more meaningful. Then we have the different modes of instruction. So first we have verbal. It's looked at like a first then next type instruction, and it's just stating full instructions on how to do a certain task and prompting them through, and hopefully using minimal cueing. And then there's visual. This is really good for cognitively challenged patients, or if they have trouble attending to a task. This can be done by the therapist demonstrating the task first, and then having the client repeat. So first watch me, and then show me. And then there's somatosensory, and this is done through tactile, proprioceptive, and kinesthetic cueing. Also seen, it's like guided movements. So you'll see this a lot with hand over hand type instruction. Then there's creating the learning environment, and the ultimate goal is to create a space that's comfortable, effective, and encourages the growth of the client. It's really good to minimize any distractors, especially at the beginning of the learning process. Also, it's good to note that if the client's end goal is to function within a loud office or community setting, that you're working towards that goal, first starting to, have less distractors and work your way back up. So then there's reinforcing and grading. Reinforcing is stems from the operant conditioning theory. So the behavior that is rewarded tends to be repeated. So we all know the child crying within a grocery store and the mother giving that child their favorite piece of candy. So now the target behavior of crying is now reinforced by providing their favorite candy, and so now in the future the child most likely will cry because they know that, hey, if I cry in the grocery store, I'll get my favorite candy. So, and then there's grading, and this is to ensure that the client can experience the sense of mastery during the learning process. The goal is to avoid frustration and fatigue. So then there's intrinsic and extrinsic feedback. So intrinsic is all done within the client themselves, and within their sensory system. So someone learning to hit a golf ball uses the visual and somatosensory feedback to evaluate their own performance within their own body, and they're able to change the task at hand individually. And then there's extrinsic, which it's information from outside, an outside source. So that's seen from anybody just talking to them, guiding them through a task, such as a therapist or a coach. And that can be done by just saying, hey, move your hand further down on the handle whenever you swing. And it's also important to make sure that you're limiting the extrinsic feedback given to a client, because that's looked at as interference, and it's just good to minimize any of verbal cues moving forward with the different types of tasks. And then the schedules within these are blocked and random. Blocked is whenever the client practice one skill until mastery. It's really imperative to make sure that the client can handle this type of schedule, because it can turn into being frustrating and fatiguing. And then there's random. So the client attempts multiple tasks or variations of the task before they've mastered it. So they're trial and erroring all different types of different learning things. All right. And then these are the different factors that support the transfer of learning. So the ultimate goal of learning is to create strategies and skills of the individual that they can apply in a variety of contexts and occupations. The OTs have many different methods available to them to help their clients achieve their goals. So here are just a few different factors that go into the transfer of learning. And then we have the summary of the entire chapter, and this is just to maximize the learning process.
Today we are going to be going over Chapter 12 of Radonsky. So first we're going to talk about task demands. So the main components of task demands is your objects used, environmental demands, social, contextual, sequencing and timing, required actions, prerequisite abilities, capabilities, skills, and then obviously safety precautions, which are a very important aspect. So we're going to break down the different types of analysis. First, we're going to start with activity-focused analysis. So this is obviously a heavy focus on the activity itself. It's going to identify primary therapeutic aspects of activity, adapt activity demands to align with therapy goals. Next, biomechanical activity-focused analysis. This is an analysis where it's very... It's similar to a medical model in the sense that you're going to be looking at range of motion, primary muscles. You're going to have gradation aspects, the strength required, the type of contraction that's needed from the muscle. Next, client-focused activity analysis. So a specific primary goal that this task is intended to advance through client performance. So you're going to evaluate therapeutic value of activity based on these characteristics. So client focus is basically looking at your client and tailoring the activities around their strengths. Environment focus is a specific task that the person wants or needs to perform in a given environment. So obviously the context of a person's environment is going to greatly influence the activity itself. There's going to be barriers which enable performance, but there's also going to be weaknesses which keep a person from being able to perform their activity. Next is performance-focused activity analysis. So you're going to name the role, list the task the person identifies as important to this role, the activities that are key part of the task. You're going to have environment, context, all of the above. So you're going to analyze what ability limitations are interfering with performance, measure abilities to confirm limitation, and overall the capacities, and treat when verified. So moving on from that, we're going to talk about selection and gradation. So obviously, grading an activity up or down is a very important role that therapists play in an intervention session. So there are two main concepts: occupation as an end and occupation as a means. So occupation as an end is activities and tasks that comprise roles. So key tasks and activities that would enable the patient to engage in roles. A person feels best when engaging in an activity if her skills match the situational challenges posed by the activity. The next is occupation as a means. This is something that us OT students hear a lot in school. So this is an activity that is used to restore one or more skills, and it must be within the patient's capacity and challenge the patient's level of ability so that through effort and practice, the patient performance improves. So kind of piggybacking off of that, dimensions which the activity is going to be graded. So there are different areas. These are just some examples: to retain sensory awareness or discrimination, decrease hypersensitivity, increase active range of motion, increase passive range of motion, decrease edema. So all of these are very important areas that could be identified and targeted in a therapy session, and could also be graded up or down based upon where your client's baseline level is. Analysis. So we kind of already talked about this, but basically size and type of tools, placement of tools, speed, complexity, physical and social environment. Basically, these are all the areas that you need to be taking into account when looking at your patient and what areas you'll address in a therapy session. Types of perspective for activity analysis. So there's activity focused, client focused, and environment focused, which we mentioned at the beginning. So activity focus is obviously going to be focused on the activity itself without considering characteristics of the client or her environment. So activity focus is just looking at the activity, not considering any sort of external influences into the client's environment or any sort of other things outside of therapy. Then moving on into the client-focused analysis, it's going to focus on the therapeutic utilization of the activity for a particular client towards specific therapeutic goals. Environment focus is occupation as an ends approach, which we mentioned earlier a few slides back. And this focuses on the fit between person and environment with regard to the activity. Finally, we're going to talk about adaptation. So a good adaptation, these are characteristics of a good adaptation. It accomplishes a specific goal, does not encourage or require odd movements or postures. It's not dangerous to a patient. Obviously, safety awareness is big, so big in therapy. Intrinsically demands a certain response on which the patient does not have to concentrate, does not demean the patient, and then reasons to adapt. One of the main tools of being a good occupational therapist is being able to adapt. So being able to modify the activity in therapy versus what it normally would have been. And then parameters used to adapt. There's activity demand, required actions, object properties, and sequencing. So you're going to want to look at their body functions and position and arrange objects relative to each other. Required actions: change difficulty materials, object properties, change handles of tools, sequencing, modify steps in time. So obviously these are three areas where adaptation takes place in a therapy session and are very important to consider when working with a client.